Here comes Chris Paul. The lob. Again!
This might be the greatest dunk of all time. And it's the product of a crazy melding of talent, timing, and attitude, all working together to create one of the wildest moments in NBA history. And if you zoom out, those exact same attributes are to credit for one of the wildest periods in NBA history, creating the most insane plays we've ever seen, and single-handedly bringing Los Angeles' forgotten franchise into the big time, and leaving a legacy never to be forgotten. And we all remember these plays, how could you not? But this team actually played entire games of basketball outside of just the dunks, and they were pretty damn good to watch. But how good? The Lob City Clippers were one of the most interesting things to come out of one of the best eras of basketball ever, and they are well worth revisiting. Whilst everyone can agree that the highlights are pretty cool, what they meant for the city and the fan base can only be understood with the historical context in mind. So in order to understand it, we need to go all the way back. Alright, let's get through this. In 1970, the NBA added 3 expansion teams into the fold for 17 total clubs, with one of them being the Buffalo Braves out of New York State. But the Braves were kind of doomed to fail from the jump. The NBA had done a half job of this expansion, and after ownership disputes, were forced to take control of the team themselves. The Braves were the third priority in their own home arena after an NHL team and a local college team. They just weren't going to survive, and in 1978, Irv Levin, the owner of the Boston Celtics, agreed to take ownership of the struggling Braves on the condition that they be moved out west to San Diego, so Levin could have, quote, a shorter commute to work. So in San Diego, the name was changed to the Clippers, a reference to the sailing ships famous for passing through San Diego Bay. Forward to 1984, then owner Donald Sterling, after one previous failed attempt, moved the Clippers from San Diego to Los Angeles without permission from the league. How he managed to do this isn't very well documented, but essentially he just relocated the team to LA. The league battled Sterling for 3 years with lawsuits trying to get the team back to San Diego, but when it appeared Sterling would win the suits, the league dropped them in exchange for a fine, and here we have the modern day LA Clippers. From 1984 up until the 2010s, the Clippers managed to see playoff basketball just 4 times, and were considered amongst American sport's biggest failures. They were sold 4 times over the journey for a total of $20 million, a staggering figure when put next to the Clippers' current worth of $4 billion. The Los Angeles Clippers were nothing short of a joke. In 2006, the Clippers won their first ever playoff series thanks to star Elton Brand and Corey Maggette. But in the 2007-8 season, Elton Brand ruptured his Achilles tendon and missed the whole year. Add together the stunted development of Sean Livingston after one of the worst injuries the league has ever seen, the Clippers just could not escape disappointment. They went a much more on-brand 23-59 and declared they were rebuilding into the following year. Most of the roster was allowed to depart, and LA once again went to the draft unsure of their future. And it was in this 2008 draft where the first piece of the puzzle would fall into place. With the 35th pick in the second round, they took DeAndre Jordan from Texas A&M University. The first piece was in, but they didn't realize it yet. Jordan was a low pick, second rounder, but had the frame and athleticism to explode within a few years. Earlier in that draft, they also picked up Eric Gordon, who would become extremely relevant later on. Between 2008 and 9, LA blew up their entire team, so much so that Chris Kaman was the only player left from their playoff run 2 years before. And this was pre-super team era, so blowing up your team meant what it used to mean. The following season, the Clippers were as bad as ever, falling away to the 14th seed in the West, but importantly, winning the draft lottery and having the rights to draft pick number 1.
With the first pick in the 2009 NBA Draft, the Los Angeles Clippers select Blake Griffin.
Blake Griffin was a pretty elite prospect, and the Clippers even traded away Zach Randolph just so they could clear a lineup spot for him. They were all in. But in the 2009 preseason camp, Blake Griffin broke his kneecap, an injury that would sideline him for the entire season. They treaded water for a whole year, knowing what they had waiting in the wings, and then, come the 2010-11 season, they were ready to unleash Blake Griffin to the world. And this kid was a freak. Blake was a ready body, with 12 extra months of professional conditioning. In his rookie season, he was selected in the All-Star game. He he won the slam dunk contest, and he won Rookie of the Year by a landslide. Clippers games had a massive TV ratings boost, especially impressive considering the Lakers were coming off 2 straight championships, and Jordan was improving rapidly. They posted a losing record, but they were damn good to watch. Through the 2011 trade period, they made the move that would put this club truly on the map.
Tim, what are your thoughts on Griffin and Paul together?
I mean, dynamic. You know, you think about the great combinations in this league. It's tremendous for the Clippers now. You know, it's an organization that's so maligned and made fun of and the butt of jokes for years and years. And now, you know, you're really building towards something. It's going to make things a lot more interesting in the Western Conference, seeing a team with 2 guys that are near the top of their positions at 2 very important positions playing together.
Eric Gordon, Chris Kaman, and their recent draft pick Al-Farouq Aminu were all told that they would have new homes in New Orleans. Look how happy they all are. In return, the Clippers would acquire their piece de resistance, 4-time All-Star Chris Paul. Remember the part about how this was a pre-super team era, before the league became the sort of place where an MVP could be traded away from a team with another MVP to a team with a different MVP, a 2-time finals MVP, and a different 8-time All-Star all on a Tuesday night when everyone's asleep? This Chris Paul trade was before that, which meant that trades of this magnitude were insanely large news. The trade was the biggest of the winter, and in its earliest form, Lob City was born.
Are you serious? That'd be Lob City. Oh my gosh.
So, for reference, that's Blake and DeAndre receiving the phone call that the Clippers have finalized a trade to bring Chris Paul to LA. Just listen to the joy in their voices. Blake literally doesn't care who they've sent to NOLA.
Hey, who did they give up again? We don't care. Yeah, hey, who make this?
He would have played with 3 starters if it meant he could play with Paul. This stuff was built in a lab. Chris Paul is 7th in most assists in league history. His ability to throw pinpoint passes is what he'd built his entire character off, both on and off the court. Meanwhile, media publications had compiled a list of the scariest things in sports. Facing 160-kilometer cricket or baseball, coming up against Ray Lewis or Sebastian Chabal in a tackle, and ranking above them all was seeing Blake Griffin running the lane while you're standing under the basket. Not to mention that DeAndre Jordan had blossomed into one of the most competent, defensive and athletic big men in the league. It was a big 3 that was not only pre-built, but that had games complementing each other, a value that is rare when putting together big-name teams. And it wasn't really a big 3 yet. The trade was viewed positively by the NBA community. Chris Paul was seen to have left an organisation that wasn't looking after him, and joining an exciting, up-and-coming young team with lots to prove. Pair all this with the sunny Los Angeles background, and you had a custom-built recipe for excitement and flashy, skillful displays of basketball. Around the league you had the Spurs and Hawks, who were tightly drilled but boring team fundamental basketball, and the other sides who had flash but were largely built on singular stars and isolation basketball. The Clippers were the perfect middle ground, and it was fair to say they were everyone's league pass team going into the back half of the season. That season they were good, but not great, but pretty good. They picked up Nick Young through the year, which is the first of a lot of acquisitions that served their cause really well throughout the Lob City era. Because it's rare that the key pieces you fill in a side are the 2 big men and the guard spot. The only thing they were lacking was elite 3-point shooting, and they had a lot of guys come in and attempt to fill that hole, some more successful than others. Despite the teething issues, the Clips went ballistic towards the end of the year, winning 12 of 14 games and saving coach Vinny Del Negro's career. Chris Paul made a damn good case for the MVP award, and him and Blake both made the All-Star team. A brilliant outcome, as pairs of teammates doing that is an anomaly, and no Clippers had ever done it in franchise history. The boys in the red, white and blue made their first playoff appearance since 2006. In Game 1 of the series against Memphis, the Clips came back from 27 points down to clutch it in one of the biggest playoff comebacks in league history. They would go on to lead the series 3-1, before choking Games 5 and 6, and then winning Game 7 at Memphis. This hiccupy, clutch yet inconsistent style will rear its head plenty more before the video is complete. In round 2, they were swept by a San Antonio team that was nearly ready to dominate the league, so not too much of a surprise there. The Clippers were still young, and this was an exciting test of what was to come. The 2012 offseason saw 2 acquisitions that would be key to the makeup of the Lob City Clippers, and they were both free agency splashes.
We welcome in by phone Jamal Crawford. Jamal, congratulations on the new deal Listen, take us through the process and how you eventually came to the Clippers.
Well, obviously, the process.
Dwight Howard, it was the Clippers that were making all of the offseason news. Latest piece of news happening today is that they re-sign Matt Barnes to a deal and will keep.
This was one of the best examples as to how to build a team. Chris Paul was their trump card and they already had their bigs developing. They didn't chase any more firepower, just solid guys with something to prove. Veteran Jamal Crawford could play the two with the silkiest handles in the game, and Matt Barnes was signed to a one-year contract with most thinking his career was twilighting. His output went from 8 to 10 points per game on an already stacked roster, and his defensive improvement was noticeable. Crawford's production also went up nearly 3 points a game that year after being on the slide for the previous 4. So they had passing and floor spacing, handles and shooting, an enforcer, an explosive scorer, an elite defender and rebounder. The progression was hot. The previous franchise record of most consecutive wins was 8, and that 2012-13 season, the Clippers won 17 straight in an undefeated December. And my God, were they fun to watch.
Look out.
And it looked like they were having fun too. Underrated in his time at Lob City was Chris Paul's backup point guard Eric Bledsoe, whose athleticism and three-point shot was a perfect foil when Paul was out of the game. Mostly remembered for his time at Phoenix and Milwaukee, Bledsoe was an integral part of the early era. Staples Center would light up for the Clippers games, and the bench would go crazy. Particularly in the early days, it just looked like a fun team to be a part of. They were enjoying themselves. In 2012-13, they would go on to win 50 games for the first time in franchise history. And conveniently for them, for every rise they experienced, the Lakers saw a fall. Which meant that with an unhealthy Kobe and a confused Laker roster, the Clippers were the best team in a two-team massive market town. But they faltered. They had a rematch against the Grizzlies, and despite going 2-0 up thanks to a Chris Paul clutch moment, they would drop 4 straight and go down in the first round. This is the next canon event in the Lob City era, because Vinny Del Negro was let go, and the Clippers went for their final push. They felt like they had every piece of the puzzle, except a proven coach. They went so hard at Celtics championship coach Doc Rivers that they traded actual draft picks for him, something never seen before. Doc signed and they traded Bledsoe for JJ Redick to boost their sharpshooting stocks at the 2, with Darren Collison signed to fill the now vacant backup point role. So here, in season 2013-14, is where the Lob City LA Clippers go from being just an exciting league pass team to a championship contender. Okay, so here we go. Apart from the flash and fun, just how good were the Lob City Clippers? In year 1 with Doc Rivers, the Clips had the best offensive rating in the league and the 9th best defensive rating. That made them one of only 3 teams to be top 10 on both sides of the ball. Blake Griffin remained miraculously uninjured that year and played 80 games. This was absolutely his most elite year. He had the best defensive, offensive, and true shooting stats in his career, and he and Paul were again both named All-Stars. DeAndre Jordan finished number 1 in rebounding in the league and number 3 in defensive win shares. And Jamal Crawford, JJ Redick, and Darren Collison also scored double digits, giving the Clippers 6 double-digit scorers on the year, which is relatively unheard of. They won a franchise record 57 games and finished 3rd in the West behind the Thunder and the Spurs. So the answer to the question is they were good. They were very good. One of the most notable season highlights was when they beat the Lakers by 50 points, the most lopsided victory in either of their histories. So, enter the playoffs, and they matched with the 6th seed, baby Golden State Warriors. And this was a great series. Could you possibly imagine a pre-formed Warriors Big 3 with all the talent but none of the respect or accolades, doing battle with this dunk-first elite offense with the eyes of the nation on them? Golden State take the first game with starring roles from Clay and the People's Champ David Lee, and then a Clipper blowout. Blake drops 35, and 6 other players hit double figures in one of the cleanest defensive performances you will see. They take home court back, in Oracle, with a ridiculous 2-point win. Another 30 from Blake, double-double from Paul, and 22 rebounds from Jordan. The Clippers led by 11 going into the 4th, and by 8 points with just 2.5 minutes to go. And then, Steph started to go crazy, and nearly brought them home, but the Clips held on to go 2-1 up. The series was just so much fun. Steph and Clay drilling ridiculous threes, DeAndre Jordan smacking in ridiculous putback dunks, Paul going crazy, and Blake Griffin truly in his prime. and with Game 4 set to go, it was eyes on the most exciting series of the playoffs.
Absolute outrage this morning against Los Angeles Clippers owner Donald Sterling and his apparent racist comments caught on tape. Everyone from President Obama to Sterling's own wife expressing outrage, and his players staging.
Donald Sterling, Clippers owner, unsurprisingly was outed as a massive racist. This was a story that took the main focus of the NBA playoffs, and the players understandably did not want to play for Sterling or his team. There were many suggestions of boycotting the Clippers, and the team itself wasn't even sure if they wanted to take part in Game 4, instead opting for a silent protest, wearing their team gear inside out so as to obscure Clipper logos. We'll get back into the effect of the Donald Sterling stuff a little later, but what actually happened to him and the team doesn't pertain to this story. The short version is he rightly had the full force of the NBA law handed to him and was forced, despite much protest, to sell the team. The Warriors, unsurprisingly, won Game 4, but the Clippers weren't done. They bounced back admirably and won Game 5 before dropping Game 6 and setting up a Staples Center classic for Game 7. CP3 showed his caliber, notching 22 points, 14 assists and 4 steals. Blake had 26 with 4 guys scoring 20. Steph got 33 while Draymond had a strong game too. This Game 7 was a beautiful amalgamation of everything that had made the series so exciting to begin with. The Clippers were just good enough in the last quarter, making plays down the stretch, and they notched their critical series win that kept their dreams of a championship alive. But they were physically and mentally spent. And they got touched up by an OKC team with MVP Kevin Durant and about to become MVP Russell Westbrook. Although it wasn't really as simple as that. In fact, the Clippers had the series tie going to OKC, and more than that, they had a 7-point lead with less than a minute to play. And then a combination of things. KD went ballistic, there was a questionable out of bounds call that went the way of the Thunder, and Chris Paul had a minute of basketball I'm sure he would love back. He thought he was going to get intentionally fouled, so he pretty much dropped the basketball leading to a Thunder basket. He fouled Westbrook on a 3, and then he fumbled the last shot of the game to give the Thunder the unlikeliest of victories. And there it was, a minute of basketball that becomes really important when you look back at it contextually. A minute of basketball that quelled the chance for a banner. The Clippers lost Game 6 and went home for the summer feeling like they had wasted a season. Would they have beat the Spurs? Maybe not. But they did it the following year, so who's to say? Regardless, they left that season empty-handed. That season was probably their best chance at the ultimate glory. Chris Paul was in the MVP race still, and given where their careers went, people often forget how generational of talents Blake Griffin and DeAndre Jordan were. And that was the best of them. Jamal Crawford won 6th Man of the Year, and the efficiency of Redick and Barnes was never higher. They beat down on bad teams hard and were an absolute headache to play. They were flashy, dominant, aggressive, and hard, but they couldn't string it together in the critical moments that mattered. Despite that being easily their best season, the following year is worth a look too. The Big Three were still very productive. JJ Redick took another step, making a whopping 200 threes that season. Austin Rivers played great minutes under his dad, and Crawford was as good as ever. They ended the year under new ownership 56-26, and would meet defending champions San Antonio in a first-round bout that more closely resembled a conference finals. This was during the NBA period where winning your division got you a boost in the standings, so Portland finished 4th despite having the 6th best record, and totally messed up the first-round matchups. This series was incredible, truly one of the great first-rounders you will see. They went blow for blow all the way to a heated Game 7 in LA where Chris Paul forgot about last year and clutched up for an all-time series winner over Tim Duncan, essentially sending that Spurs dynasty into retirement.
Green on Paul, and God, he got it! 1 second left! Clippers by 2!
Flash forward a week later, and the Clippers are up 3-1 on the 2-seeded Houston Rockets, looking to clinch their first conference finals ever. And they lost. Somehow the Clippers lost 3 straight, including being on the wrong end of a Game 6 19-point fourth quarter comeback at the hands of Corey Brewer and Josh Smith. Dwight Howard severely outplayed DeAndre Jordan. Chris Paul couldn't hit a shot, Blake didn't score in the fourth quarter, and the rest is history. If this series went the other way, they faced the Golden State Warriors, who were in the infancy of their dynasty, and to be honest, that series would have gone the distance. The Clips knew how to beat the Dubs, they've done it before. But we'll never know, because the Clippers failed yet again when the lights were brightest. The rest of Lob City is kind of just a footnote in NBA history. You could talk about the Paul Pierce and Lance Stevenson aged care arc, the injuries to CP3 and Blake, or even the team holding DeAndre Jordan hostage in his own home until he re-signed. They had another couple 50-win years. They were good enough. But in the midst of one of the greatest teams ever, the Clippers, like most others, paled in comparison. And eventually, after 2017, the organisation blew the roster up. Chris Paul went to Texas, Blake was part of a mid-season trade to Detroit, and DeAndre Jordan opted out of his contract to become a free agent. Sadly, apart from Paul, I think it's fair to say that the breaking up of Lob City spelt the slow end of the careers of nearly everyone on that team. The reality is that they missed their opportunity to win a ring for LA and one for themselves. DeAndre got one last year playing garbage time for Denver, but the ultimate success for the Clippers was what they were all chasing. And to be honest, would have transcended all of their careers to a much higher status. So, were they good? Yes, they were extremely good. Their highlights are some of the best all time. But that Clippers team was so much more than that. They had 2 top 10 league players and 7 double-digit scorers on one team. They were insanely efficient offensively, their rim protection was elite, and they were regular season, flat-track bullies. So that begs the question, why could they not put it together when it mattered most? There's a few things at play here, some more important than others, but all contributing factors to the heartbreaking failures that the Clippers were, and why they were on the wrong end of more Game 7s than anyone can care to count. The first element is a specific one, and it's the untold impact of the Donald Sterling affair at the top level in the midst of their most dangerous playoff run.
I was all in, shut down the whole season. But maybe that was too far. But as far as that game that day, you could reschedule it. You got to sort this thing out because there's some deep-rooted stuff with him that had to be addressed.
When the Donald Sterling stuff happened, the Clippers and nearly the whole league were ready to hang up the sneakers and walk out on the NBA. The Clippers played out of uniform to send a message, but many players on the team believed that wasn't enough.
You had people giving their opinion about what they should do and what you should do, and this is y'all's moment. This is y'all's, you got to take a stand. And we even had some players from Golden State say, hey, if you guys don't want to play, we won't play either.
They elected not to boycott the playoffs, but the indecision inside the locker room was palpable. The Monday before Game 4 was chaos. Civil rights leaders had flown in, there were marches in the street, and the NBA owners were figuring out how to deal with the situation. Meanwhile, the Clippers had a game to play.
I don't know how close we were to potential boycott. My sense was, especially in the playoffs, talking to a lot of players, there was a sense like this is unfair to us. There were some, outside commentators who were telling the players they should be boycotting. And I think the sense from players was like, this is a league problem. This is your job. You should be dealing with this. It's unfair to put us in a position and say...
You could deep dive into this whole situation and make a whole nother video about the fallout. But the relevant part to this story is that despite the banning and change of ownership, the internal fallout was massively detrimental to what was to that point shaping up to be a solid playoff run. The other thing that plagued them came later in the run, but was still very much prevalent in the prime Clipper sides.
I personally feel like that was our downfall with the Clippers. We had a lot of talent too, but our egos, mental toughness, everything you really need to be a championship team, we lacked.
Originally, when the Chris Paul trade happened, the team was over the moon. And it appeared to continue that way for a while, with articles coming out professing that LA's locker room culture was the best in the league. And Doc Rivers echoed these opinions publicly.
14 and 15 were the 2 years that I look back on. Still one of the most enjoyable seasons of my career. I thought those teams, those were special groups. Special locker rooms, special groups.
But as the team progressed, there appeared tangible issues, namely between Blake and CP3, with regards to whose team it was. There was no defined leader. You had the star floor general and the franchise player. This animosity was evidenced later when they wore different colours. However, Chris Paul years later was quoted as saying that he missed Blake and he only realised what he had once it was gone. This is a unique circumstance in that usually chemistry starts out rough and is forged through adversity. With this Clippers team, it seemed that every loss and wasted year further drove a wedge into the team's bond. And it would seem obvious that if the guys couldn't agree on their place in the team, that the most important clutch moments, especially in the playoffs, would be squandered.
Like, it was kind of apparent that the group was like disjointed in a way, but like there was some pettiness there that sort of split us up.
The third element in what made the Clippers disappointing was kind of just bad luck. Injuries plagued their stars at inopportune times, and the real kick that most people forget is the simple fact that the Clippers found their stride in amongst easily the best Western Conference that the league ever saw. There's been a lot of reflection on the early 2010s because its stars are all now well into the twilight of their careers. And the realization seemed to be that that era was amongst the most competitive in basketball history, with no one team dominating a decade like we saw previously. Instead, it was a bunch of franchise players going to war with each other every night. And it's very difficult to remember a better Western Conference than the one that gave the Clippers early playoff exits every year. You had the Dynasty Warriors team that set the best record in league history, with the championship Big Three San Antonio Spurs as a 67-win 2 seed. You had the best OKC Thunder team in franchise history with crazy Hall of Fame talent. The ever-reliable grit and grind Grizzlies who deserve their own video. The severely underrated prime Harden Dwight Rockets team. That elite Damon Aldridge Blazers side. And a championship Mavs team with some of the greatest to ever do it. This might be a hot take, but there's a decent chance that if you inserted this team into the current NBA system, they would be a top seed in either conference. But instead, the Clippers were born into one of the most talented periods of basketball the game has seen, and a period in which the conferences had never been more lopsided. And unfortunately, LA happened to be in the wrong one. The level of play required to make deep playoff runs in the West at that time was insane, and they just couldn't cut it. The LA Lob City Clippers were a fever dream. It was like watching an all-star team play ball 82 nights a year. Unfortunately for them, it seemed like those 82 nights in the regular season was where they did their best work, which is a shame, because despite all the flash, they grinded in tough, big market conditions for years, and they never really came close to achieving the ultimate goal. But hopefully, they aren't forgotten, because they helped shape one of the defining periods of a sport by being different and memorable, and they will forever be one of the funnest teams to ever step foot on a basketball court. And that's gotta count for something.